on this bill, and I want to thank the Minister for her speech, and I also want to especially thank the Library and Research Service that served us very well and that produced the abstract for us and educated us. And so we're talking about the purpose of the bill. The bill itself is very, very short. The schedules attached are somewhat longer, and the context of this bill is very important, and previous speakers have referred to it. And we're talking about a period between January 1821 and January 1861. And this bill is going to, I was going to say get rid of, but the exact word, I was rushing from something else, so the word escapes me. They're going to abandon or get rid of. Yeah, but that period of time from 1821 to 1861 has already been referred to. It hits all of us. We're talking about the Daniel O'Connell and emancipation during this period of time, right up to the famine. And again, it's hard to look at this and realise that we're still dealing with famine in the 21st century, and I'm going to come back to the body of this very quickly. I'm not going to speak very long on it, but really it's a feeling of awful frustration, really, that we learn so little. And while this is a very technical bill with statutes and regulations that we don't need anymore, that are obsolete, and it's a very welcome piece of work, it brings up so many memories from a time, and yet we're doing the exact same thing all over again. And we're doing it in Palestine, we're doing it in the Sudan, and we're allowing it to happen everywhere. But I won't use my voice on that just for the moment, but just to say it, I couldn't but say it. Just in relation to what the Library and Research have pointed out to us, and I think it's very important, really, that when we have law, that it should be clear, and we should know where we stand with the law, both from the ordinary person and from business people, just because of really as a rights-based reason, and also to save money. And so it's this type of reform has been going on now for 20 years, since 2005, and I want to thank the Law Reform Commission and the subcommittee that has worked on this for their very good work in relation to what is really redundant legislation. And four main policy-related outcomes is what we're told it will be the result of this. So the rule of law, in a state that follows the rule of law principles, citizens and businesses should know the law that regulates them and whether that law is enforced. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute in relation to other pieces of legislation, modern pieces of legislation that have never been commenced. But we should know whether the law is enforced, and the work of the Law Reform Commission will identify definitively what pre-1922 secondary legislation still applies. Number two, reduced compliance cost. The work will reduce compliance costs for businesses and for public servants and regulatory bodies who must spend time and more money finding the up-to-date picture of legislation. And in a previous life, I'm fully aware of how difficult that is and how costly it becomes. Rights and obligations imposed by law should be easy to find. It's very basic. Rights and obligations imposed by law should be easy to find. Consolidation of legislation, and then the digital first policy. And again, rights and obligations imposed by law should be easy to find, and we're going through this process to ensure that, and that's very welcome. And we're living in the 21st century where international law is being reduced to terrible terms like rules-based order. We don't know whose rules, what rules, whoever is in power at the time, as opposed to international-based law based on rights. Rights that should be easy to find and to implement. None of that is happening, of course, in relation to international law and what Israel blatantly is getting away with. And then we had the OECD report back in 2010 in relation to this, and they pointed out Ireland has a long-standing issue of needing to simplify a complex stock of legislation. All of this has been said, and I just wanted to highlight that and the clarity of the work from the library service. And I'm going to finish just on this one. My colleague, Thomas Pringle, unfortunately, who's not here in this stall, did a huge amount of work in the last stall in asking questions on what legislation hadn't been implemented or what number of reviews hadn't been carried out. And I wonder, Minister, I won't be here, but I will re-listen to your answer. Could we get some clarification? Is there a body of work going on by the Law Reform Commission or any other body in relation to legislation that has never been implemented or has been implemented only in part? And that's just a sample of the answers that my Deputy Pringle when he was here as deputy, he went to the trouble and every single department had answer, and he limited his question to 10 years. And the answers that came back was an absence of data in relation to that, an absence of a forum to look at that and to see. We should know within a reasonable space of time what legislation has not been commenced, why it hasn't been commenced. I'm thinking later tonight we'll be looking at Údarás na Gaeltachta, and it'll come up about Ach na Teanga Geficúla. And I mean, it's only a few years, and some of them the sections have still to be implemented. But how many pieces of legislation have we on our books for years, 10 years, 20 years, that have not been fully commenced, not to mention implemented, not fully commenced? And then we have the reviews that should be taking place, sometimes as a matter of course, sometimes written into the legislation, like with the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act that we passed back in 2017 or 18. And built into that piece of legislation was an obligation to review that law to see if it was effective. Now, I see this week that your colleague, the Minister for Justice, has announced that it has been published yesterday or the day before. 5 years after the obligation, 5 years after the obligation should have been complied with. So if I know that just for my interest in that piece of legislation, how many other pieces of legislation are in the same way? So if you could clarify that, I'd really appreciate it.